Hi vinyl community, it's Mike here, and I wasn't intending to make a video this week, but then I went over to Chris Propfe, Mr. Musically Obsessed's channel, and he's got a really intriguing thread going at the moment, and it only involves showing 2 albums, which is really good, but it also means I'm going to have to break a promise that I made to myself when I first started making VC videos about 6 or 7 months ago. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And it's all around this album. And now I've broken my promise because I promised myself that I would never show the Beatles on my channel. The reason being not because I don't like the Beatles. I think they're an okay band. Obviously, massively influential, but you know, to say the least, they get more than their fair share of exposure on the VC, don't they? You know, every day there are people talking about them and their discography. There are whole channels devoted just to the Beatles. There are people, you know, people who make videos that know more about the Beatles than I'm sure Paul McCartney does. Absolutely incredible. So, I mean, how on earth can I compete with something like this? You know, there's also the musical paleontologists who like to tell you that all popular music comes back to a common ancestor, and that common ancestor is the Beatles. I don't believe it for a second, but you know, some people do. Anyway, the thread itself, it's called Their Sgt Peppers. What Chris wants us to do is to find an album by an artist or a band that we like that can be considered their Sgt Pepper. Well, what does that mean? You know, how can you really say, oh yeah, this album by this band, this is a Sgt Peppers? Well, I think what we have to do is to actually look at the significance of this album, and you know, whatever you say about the Beatles, whatever you say about this album, it is hugely influential, isn't it? It's culturally significant in a very big way. I can't imagine there's anyone on the VC that hasn't heard, or at least heard of, Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's an iconic album. So how do you go about deciding that somebody else's album is their Sgt Pepper's? Well, let's have a look at the album itself, and you know, what are the factors about Sgt Pepper's that might be emulated by others? Well, to start with, the album cover is iconic, isn't it? You know, everybody knows this album cover. But really, I don't think a fantastic album cover would really qualify an album to be their Sgt Pepper's. So what else could it be? Well, I did read that during the Sgt Pepper sessions at Abbey Road, that Ringo Starr was so bored that he learned to play chess. So let's see if there's an album by a band where the drummer was so bored during the recording session that they learned a board game. Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's the direction to go in, do you? So what else? Well, you know, this album was influential, very influential. This album was #1 all around the world, apart from in France, where it only made #4 in the album charts. So, you know, the French with their great taste are an outlier. So could I find an album that was #1 around the world but didn't quite hit the heights in France? Again, no, that's too much research. So let's try something a bit more likely. Well, You know, this album, it was a departure from what the Beatles had done before. You know, it was a revelation in many ways. So, could I find an album that was a departure in style and content by another band or another artist? I think I probably can. The other thing about this is that the Beatles pushed the limits as to what was possible in the recording studio when they made this album. You know, they used samples mainly by manipulating, cutting up magnetic tape, playing guitars backwards, etc., etc. But you know, they really push things. So maybe that's the direction that I should go in. So what have I chosen? Well, I've chosen Kate Bush's fourth studio album, The Dreaming. Now, this album was a real departure from anything she had done before. It was a non-commercial album, let's say. All of the others, her other albums, you know, did far better. Sales were far better. So there's a single from here, "Sat in Your Lap," that made number 11 in the singles charts, which was really unheard of for a Kate Bush song. And you know, there was another single release here, which is "There Goes a Tenor." Didn't even make the top 25. But this is an absolutely brilliant album. And Kate took responsibility for producing this album herself, so she could experiment. And she experimented using Fairlight CGI. She hadn't used a Fairlight before in any of her previous albums. And you know, she was able to do all sorts of sampling. There's a lot of influences from all sorts of other music, including sort of, you know, there's Aboriginal sounds on here, all sorts of stuff. It's an extremely experimental album, and Melody Maker on its release said this album was initially bewildering and not a little preposterous, but then they went on to say, but yeah, give it a go, give it a chance, and that's what a lot of people have done. Apparently, this album did better in the US than her previous albums had. Kate Bush herself once described this album as her "She's Gone Mad" album. So it's very different. So that's why I've decided that The Dreaming by Kate Bush is her Sgt Pepper album. So go over to Chris Prophe's site. I'll leave a link in the description, and have a go yourself. Cheers, Sam. Bye.